Designing with CSS is fun. In this chapter we will learn more about CSS basics, page layouts, using background images, and style sheets. There are some really exciting enhancements in this version, and I can't wait to show them to you. Now we're going to be designing with CSS. We'll take a look at how, with the help of the CSS panel and your property inspector and a few other little tips and tricks, you'll be making great CSS in no time. We need to understand what selectors are, what the box model is, using background images. Then we can lay out our pages with CSS and then work with some style sheets. So let's get started. In my Files panel, we're going to define a site for Chapter 6. So I'm going to manage my sites. I'm going to click on New. This is going to be Chapter 6. And I will navigate to that particular chapter. Remember, we have chapters right now, but in the end, when it's your own site, you're going to be defining your root folder, and all of your files are going to be inside of your root folder. Why we're doing that, again, is so that when we move things around, then Dreamweaver helps us update our links for us. So I'm going to open my project files. I'm going to go to Chapter 6 and open, and select, and now save. I can click on Done, and if you would open CSSexplained.html, so the benefits of using CSS is pretty numerous. CSS dramatically decreases our load time, and it requires less code in page styling than when we had tables that we used to style all the time. And it makes use of system caching as well. We'll explain that in a minute. CSS enables us to display our content before our images and not the other way around. If you're brand new to Dreamweaver and you've never watched a page load before that had a lot of images on it, really nothing else on the page can happen until those images are loaded. So the fact that our content can load before our images means that even if we have really large images that are going to be loaded into our page, at least the end user can start reading our page first. CSS increases accessibility, and we'll get more into exactly what that means in a little bit as well. There's different CSS for multiple devices. So for instance, if I have a PDA, or if I have an iPhone, or now an iPad, how I want that to display in those different devices means I really just need a different style sheet. That way I don't have to totally restructure my page. I can just restructure my CSS and add things and take away things and change sizes strictly to make use of those multiple devices. CSS can also increase my SEO, or my search engine friendliness, and again we'll explain what that is in just a minute as well. So why does my page load faster? When we used tables to lay out the structure of our page, tables are not accessible really at all. They appear on our screen in all one go. So no part of the table will appear until the entire table is downloaded and rendered. So that takes a whole lot longer to display than typical rendering of CSS pages. CSS pages are typically external files. So they are called once and cached. So the entire time the user is visiting the entire site, not just the page, but the entire site, then there's no need to reload that file. Unlike a regular web page that has tables on it, so each time the user would go to a new page, it would have to reload all the tables on that page. So I'm going to scroll down just a little bit here, and we'll talk about accessibility. Accessibility is really twofold. First, we need to think about the software and the machines. So there's just greater visibility in web searches. If we are using an accessible site, meaning that we have added alt text to our images, we've utilized our column headers, captions, page titles, link titles, etc. And we've taken into consideration who is going to be using our site. Might there be somebody who needs a braille or a voice device, etc., that is going to be looking at our page? Whenever we put an image on our page, we need to think about what goes best with that particular description. And we talked a little bit about that when we inserted images. But now that we're talking about CSS, we'll also include that thought for column headers and captions and page titles etc. I've included a link on this page about the W3C, which is also the World Wide Web Consortium, and why it's important and how to meet their particular guidelines. There's really 3 sets of guidelines, and it's super important to at least meet their very first guideline. And they want to help you meet those guidelines, so they give you lots of great information. So we need to make sure that the structure on our page is correct for those types of people. Somebody who might not actually see our page at all and uses a machine to read our page for us. Keep those things in mind, our end user, while we're designing those pages. Now, search engine optimization. So spiders can typically search CSS-driven sites much easier just because of the structure of the page than typical old-style table-based pages. Oh, and by the way, a spider is also known as a robot or a crawler, and it's basically looking at and grabbing the content of your pages to add to the search engine index. So remember that it's important that you have links coming in and going out from your page, and that's what the spider is looking for, is more food to chew on. So the more times they find links to your site, the more times they will stop and visit. So Google relies especially on its spiders to create its vast index. So it's very important that we have both our content be relevant and our links be relevant on our pages. Now, as we go along through the rest of our chapters, hopefully we'll talk about usability quite a bit, especially with CSS. And some of that is that users basically spend 80% of their time above the fold. So without having to scroll on the page at all is basically what I'm talking about. I know it's a website, but think about whether you have to scroll or not, and whether you'll actually do that or not. So are you making the best experience for that particular end user? So we'll talk some about early team planning, storyboarding pages with a good explanation of why elements are where they are, use of white space, consistent elements like search forms. Basically, think about your search. Where do you expect that search to be? Do you expect it to be in the lower left-hand side of your page? No. You expect it to be in the upper right-hand corner of your page. Using low-profile prototypes. We've talked about this some already. Fireworks, InDesign, Balsamic, etc. And really the ability with CSS to be able to reuse elements. We need to think about what things that we might want to reuse as we go through and mark up our page. And before we can really do that, we need to take a look at the box model. So we'll take a look at that next.